I think we figured out at one point the number of cars that you could actually design in that attraction was well beyond the billions. It was unbelievable how many different cars you could design, what variations there would be. And the idea that you would connect with that design and then take it with you into the ride and have that, using that wristband technology, have that what you had designed, take it with you, and then have that report back to you how well your car performed in the test track ride experience. Just unbelievable that we were able to accomplish that.
That's Imagineer Trevor Bryant, and you're listening to the Tomorrow Society podcast. Thanks for joining me here on episode 227 of the Tomorrow Society podcast. I am your host, Dan Heaton. My guest today is Trevor Bryant, who worked on some of my favorite attractions at Walt Disney World and beyond, including Horizons at EPCOT Center, which he worked on soon after he had joined the model shop, and he was closely involved in that, including the installation at Tahunga and then in Florida. Also worked on Binaural audio, which started out in the post-show of the Monster Sound Show and then was at Alien Encounter, worked on a lot of cool R&D projects, including the Indiana Jones Adventure and the second version of Test Track, which you heard in the intro, him talking about the many challenges with interactivity and putting that in the show. And we also talk a bit about Tron Realm at Shanghai. Lots to cover with Trevor, so let's get right to it. Here is Trevor Bryant. Trevor, thank you so much for talking with me.
Hi, Dan. Well, thanks for asking me to be here.
Oh, definitely. Horizons, I have to say, is one of my all-time favorite attractions, but you've worked on a lot more even than that are ones that I really enjoy. But I'd love to learn a little bit more about your background even. Like, what got you interested in even working in, like, the entertainment world and especially ultimately in themed entertainment?
Well, I was actually hoping you'd ask that question because I had formulated a little answer in my head.
Great.
I think my career started when I was about 7 years old. My parents bought me a projector, which I got two films with. One was 8mm films. One was Laurel and Hardy, and the other one was Creature from the Black Lagoon. And it was a little hand crank projector. And I used to sit in the closet and watch the movies. One day I got the idea of using their back balcony and kind of closing it off with some blankets and turning it into a little theater. And I charged the kids in the neighborhood, I think, 10 cents to come see Creature for the Black Lagoon. So I think that's when it all started. After that, I was an artist for quite a while, and then doing a lot of work with rock and roll bands and that kind of thing. And then I got a job working for an architectural model building firm in years. And then I went to see the first Star Wars film. So this was in 1978, 79, somewhere around there. And I was blown away by the special effects like so many other people, and picked up and a lot of magazines. Cinemagic, I remember, was one popular magazine at that time, and started reading about it and decided, well, I should work in that industry and take what I've learned in architectural model building and see if I can apply it to special effects and film. And I started applying, writing letters to the studios, of course, got no answer. And to make a long story short, I wound up literally with buying a plane ticket to LA from New Jersey. I had $25 in my pocket. I knew no one here. And I decided I was just going to get into the business. So I was probably the first homeless person in California, I think. That was 1979. And I came out and found a job that day working for another architectural firm, and they fronted me some money to stay at a motel, and that got me moved to California. And then I started really aggressively pursuing the studios. I got an offer from Paramount about 3 or 4 months later, which I was going to take. It was doing architectural models for a TV commercial they were doing. I remember it was filming San Francisco. And at the same time, I got a letter from Disney, who I had applied to months and months before, asking me to come in for an interview. And I did that. It was a fortuitous interview. I came to Imagineering, which was at that time WED Enterprises in Glendale. And I had never been to a theme park. I had no idea. I had not been to Disneyland yet. I hadn't been in California for just a few months. For me, it was just an opportunity to get a job. And when I got there for the interview, they started talking about this EPCOT project. Had no idea what it was and just sounded like fun. So I jumped in.
Wow, that's interesting, that you got that not having, known that much about even going, because you were thinking, right, when you applied to Disney, more like a studio type job, something in that realm?
Exactly right. I thought I couldn't understand why they were having me interview in Glendale. I thought the studio was in Burbank. What happened was I interviewed with May Turner Moody, who was the HR person at that time. And she said to me, she looked at my portfolio and she said, "You need to meet Maggie Elliott over in the model shop." So I walked with her over to the model shop, didn't have any idea what I was walking into, and was completely overwhelmed by what I saw going on there. It was just a beehive of art and activity and people building models and crazy, crazy things. And I thought, I want to be here more than anything else in the world. And so I turned the job down at Paramount. I think Disney offered me 25 cents more an hour. So I jumped at that.
That was the reason. So I know your first project you got involved with was Horizons, which to me is just it's interesting just because that attraction of those early Epcot ones has just hung around in a lot of people's minds for so long. People love that attraction. So I'm curious, how you got started working on that project and what that was like.
So I was originally hired to do the architectural models on the 1/8-inch scale, big overall model of Epcot. And the very first model that I was given to work on was the Horizons building. And that was just, that may have been telling of the future as well. I had no idea. To me, it was just an architectural project and gave me something to do. That was the first one I started working on. And then I did a lot of other architectural model building for WDI or WED at that time. I was in the model shop one day and a fellow named Claude Coates walked in. Claude Coates was one of the original animators from the studio, come over to WDI or to WED. And Claude was kind of walked over to my desk and was looking at what I was doing. And he said, "I need someone to sculpt a submarine for me." And I said, "Well, that's something I've never done. I'm not sure I really know how, but I'm willing to give it a try." So he brought me back to his office and he showed me some napkin sketches of this little sub. And I went back and got some green foam at the time, which we used a lot, and started carving out this little model of a submarine and brought it back to him. And he liked it. He liked what I had done. And, we talked about more we could do with it. And Claude then introduced me to show design, and kind of took me out of the architectural side and said that he would like me to work with him on the show models for Horizons. What a break. I mean, I had not been with the company. I've been with the company for less than a year. And to be invited into the show design process was really something for any model builder back in that model shop at that time.
So what do you think it was that that Claude, connected with you that made him kind of pick you for this role? Because, Claude, like you said, legendary Imagineer, animator. This was kind of near the end of his career, but had worked on so much at Disneyland. Why do you think he connected with that and wanted to work with you?
To be honest, I think that first time that he came in the model shop and just looked at me and asked me to do that, I don't think maybe Maggie had sent him over to talk to me, that she thought I might be qualified to do it. But what happened after that was that Claude and I really did hit it off. I liked him a lot. He was a real artist. He was inventive and creative and kind of really far out thinking. And it was really fun for me to start working with him. He was the original show designer for something called Future Probe.
Right.
It was called Horizons back then. And he had been working with General Electric, and he kind of introduced me to this whole idea of what he was trying to do with what he could do, kind of looking at this far off future. And he had in his mind kind of laid out a ride track and how it would work within that building. But he was not really adept at the engineering side of things. So there were a lot of failure points in where the costs were going with Future Probe at that time. And at that point, George McGinnis started becoming more involved and looking at the ride track. Unfortunately, it evolved into almost a design war between the two of them. George really decided to pursue the Horizons ride track and configuration of how the show would lay out on his own. And Claude went off on his own. And a funny story, I got in the middle of it by being asked to represent Claude's design in a 1-inch scale model, which I had done. And then Marty invited George in to show his model that he had done. And I remember Marty came to me and said, well, you have to make sure no one else attends this meeting. It has to be very top secret. And I was a new guy and I was kind of intimidated. I felt like a security guy. But I remember that was the first day I met Exitensio, who showed up at the meeting, and I told him he wasn't invited. And he said, he looked at me and he said something like, you don't worry about it. I can be here. And after that, X became somebody that I visited frequently. I never really got to work with him much, but we became quite friendly after that. So wonderful. All of those guys, from Claude, X, Ward Kimball, they were really the masters of the work that we were doing. And for me, as a young model builder coming into there, they were the mentors for anybody wanting to work up in that business or in that company. And they were so knowledgeable, every one of them. I got to work with Colin Campbell. There's just a whole bunch of them that were really great. Harper Goff,
right?
Great people, really great people.
Yeah, it was so interesting with EPCOT because you had all these kind of older, legendary people working with younger people like yourself, and kind of this timing where everybody combined. Well, I'd love to know a little more about I believe you were involved with certain scenes and working on models of those. So were there certain ones that you focused on more in Horizons that you were working on?
After George came in with his version of the track, and it was settled that George would really pick up the show design responsibilities, I kind of switched away from Claude and working directly with George. And George was really focused on the ride vehicle and its relationship to the sets and the scenery, how it was always going to be facing the sets, and then those perspectives and those points of view. So I became job captain for the 1-inch scale model. At that time, at Imagineering, the 1-inch scale model became the Bible for any kind of set work that was going to be done, or any kind of show set drawings, engineering, everything was based off of the model. So I really focused on the entire ride with the 1-inch scale model. Specific scenes, I remember the desert scene was a big one because of the forced perspective in that scene. Something I knew nothing about at the time. I had not come out of a theater background. So I was learning about forced perspective and how that worked, and George loved it. He really enjoyed creating that illusion. So trying to figure out what those points of view were and how to create that illusion was really fun to do. And I think the space section too became a real adventure to do for me. That was quite a beautiful scene to build and think about.
Well, excellent. Well, I know you went and worked. I believe you were on site involved with the installation of it. I'm curious to know a little bit what was that like when you actually were involved with installing it?
So I was a model builder. Came in got hired to do the architectural models, and then wound up doing the show design and the show models. By doing the show models, and job captaining that, I really became kind of the guru for what needed to be built. I also had and somewhat of a building experience. In my younger days, I'd worked as a carpenter and done a lot of general construction experience. So I had some basic knowledge of construction. They asked me to start going to Tahunga to oversee the construction of all of the sets. So they were first built at Tahunga, and I then took on this role. At the time, it was called Field Art Director, which was the assignment was to go there, make sure the construction was proceeding according to plan, review all the drawings with all of the people that were actually building sets and scenery, and work out all those details. To be honest, I think when I first started doing that job, there was a bit of resistance. Remember, Horizons was second right. phase. So there had already been this big crew set up, and a lot of people had a lot of experience through the first phase of EPCOT. And here comes this young guy comes in and is trying to tell them what to do. I gained a lot of respect, though, at Tahunga. I think there were a lot of moments where working with the, especially with the carpenters and the show set people, where they realized that I wasn't a guy who just sat at a desk doing drawings or building models, that I actually knew about construction. So I did gain a lot of respect. And then the transition from there was to go to Florida and actually do the field direction in Florida. There's one moment I don't know if I've talked about before. When we were building the space scene, there was we had constructed all of the set pieces for the outer space scene. They couldn't be configured together. The Tahunga warehouse wasn't big enough to set them all up. So as they would be exactly staged in Florida. So they were kind of in separate pieces all over the place. And then we had them all lit separately, like they would be in the show. And I remember walking in when it was all fully staged and ready for buy-off and thinking I was in a modern art gallery. When you take all those pieces and you break them apart and they're not in the context of the story, they suddenly look really bizarre and really quite beautiful. And I remember feeling a real sense of accomplishment, that was something that I had done or working with all those people, of course, not just me, but I had been involved with that was really artistic and beautiful and really compelling. So for me, it was a great reward at that moment. And then the transition was to go to Florida and actually do the set installation, which was a learning experience.
What were the challenges there that you mentioned it?
Well, there was one that was really remarkable when we were doing the desert scene. That entailed a lot of rock work. And I had no experience doing rock work. John Olson was kind of the rock work guru. Skip Lang also had done a lot of rock work. They were the rock work guys. And the day came for the actual, the rebar had been put in, all of the structural steel for the rock work, but the rock work itself needed to go in. And that was a process of shooting gunite, which is kind of a concrete that comes out of a hose at the end of a cement truck. I got a call saying that they were going to do that at like 5 a.m. the next morning. And I said, okay, well, I'm sure John or Skip will be there. Well, they were in Japan, so they weren't available. And I kind of panicked at that point. I got there and I remember there were 3 cement trucks lined up and all of these contractors with big hoses standing in the show set area. And they were all looking at me like, what do we do now? And I called Maggie Elliott at the time and I said, Maggie, I've not ever done this before. And I'm not sure what exactly to do. I said, can we get somebody out here? And she said, there's no one available. You need to figure it out. I did it. And it kind of blew me away that I did it. I worked, fortunately, they had done a lot of it before. So they were quick to instruct me on what I needed to tell them to do. But we got through it, and it actually came out just looking great. And it was a great learning experience for me to know how to do that. But not something I expected to do when I went to Florida. I was expecting a lot of construction, traditional construction of sets and scenery with carpentry and maybe some steel. There was another great moment that was when we were putting in the glass for urban habitat, and also we did it as well for the space birthday party scene at the end of the space colony there. And that required laying glass on a steel frame, and the glass it used Pepper's Ghost. Well, the problem was that with Pepper's Ghost and Haunted Mansion, you have the glass position for a ride vehicle that's traveling across at a horizontal plane, and there's no change. In the scenes it's particularly in the space colony scene, the birthday party scene, the track was actually on an angle. So it was very difficult to position that glass in that frame so the reflection would work as you were going down that angle for all the guests in the cars. That was a challenge. And then when we were doing the urban habitat scene, we had a lot of problems with adjusting the glass to get the reflection right. And there was arguments among the different tradespeople there as to whose responsibility that was. Some said, well, it's the steel workers because it's going into a steel frame. Other people said, no, it's the carpentry union because they're using glass and they're putting it into the frame. So there was a lot of back and forth. We couldn't get anybody to agree. So finally, Gary Powell and I went in at 2:00 in the morning, and we started setting the glass in position. And because we knew we could avoid the trades. So we were kind of violating union rules, which we knew, but we thought we could get away with because it was 2 a.m. while they caught us. We did get in a bit of trouble for that, but it was put in perfect.
Well, it ended up looking great. I did want to ask you about one other scene. I heard you tell a story about the orange smell, which I know people love. Still think about that, the smell of the oranges from Horizons, but that was a little challenging. I heard you mention the Retro Magic. I'd love for you to talk a little about the possible challenges of that smell, basically.
Well, we knew that there was we had a scent cannon, and we knew that with the scent cannon manufacturer, they could spray an orange scent into that scene. So as you arrived into the desert scene, you would smell these oranges, and that would be a wonderful sensation to add to everything else that was going on there. It worked just great. The problem was it worked great everywhere in the building. The scent started going through the air conditioning systems, and it wound up being everywhere. The way I remember that it was fixed, and I hope I'm right in this, but I think there was some control of the AC units that they were able to set it up so that it didn't flow into all the other areas. But they also found a paint that was a odor absorptive paint. And in the transition tunnel, before you went into the orange scene, they were able to paint that scene with that odor absorptive paint, and that helped control the problem. So that was one solution, but it was a pretty strong smell, and if we weren't able to control it, it was going to be everywhere in that building.
That's so interesting. Well, I have one last question on Horizons. I'm just curious, having worked on it, because Horizons has been closed for 25 years, yet people still bring that up more than plenty of attractions that closed 5 or 10 years ago or more recently. Why do you think it still resonates so strongly with people, like this one attraction that was there for 16 years but has been gone for longer?
I think in a big way, it's because it was the only one at Epcot that really dealt with the future, other than later the Seas Pavilion, which really didn't so much speak to the future, but Horizons was about the future. It was about predicting what the future might be. And I think that was pretty compelling for people. I think especially younger kids that came in with their families, they saw a hopeful, beautiful future that they could aspire to and want to be in the future. So I think that's a big reason for it. I'm not sure. I know for General Electric, it was really about getting brand out there and making sure that brand was there. And I think a lot of that came from Carousel of Progress, which was also about foretelling the future in a lot of ways, kind of showing that progression. So they were kind of the two driving points as we went into it. But I think it really did become this beautifully told story of what the future might be. And that was pretty compelling to an audience to want to see that and want that future for themselves.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I went there as a kid. I think first time I rode it, I was like 8 or something, which is perfect age, I think, for something like that. Well, I want to ask about some of the other things you worked on. I know you worked on, what I've always found fascinating was the binaural audio, which went into, I believe, was the post show. I remember going to like the Monster Sound show at Disney MGM Studios, which at that point was like a brand new technology. I'd love to know a little bit about that, because I know then that comes up again with you in the future with Alien Encounter.
I'm really glad you asked that question. That started with Joe Garlington, who was heading up an effort for Tron. The idea was that it was going to be an attraction in Communicore, I believe, where it was all interactive, and guests would come in and have all of these different interactive experiences that were Tron based. He had some really wild ideas. One of them I remember was an alien psychologist that would do analysis of you in there, and there were some other crazy ideas like that. But it was really fun. I know that they invested a lot of money and did a big mock-up at WDI for it, and it never went anywhere. It wasn't funded, but it really was innovative, and it was probably the very first interactive experience that WDI tried to do. Other than at the end of Horizons, we did have that interactive experience, which if you want to go back and talk about that, I'd love to talk about that.
Oh, yeah. I don't mind jumping back. Yeah. Let's talk about that, the choose your ending.
As far as the binaural goes, what happened was Joe Harrington was working on the project. And he started showing up with his binaural sound system, which was, I think it was Sennheiser that had created a mannequin head with 2 microphones in where the ears are. And the idea was that when you held the mannequin head, the recording that went through the ear canals of the mannequin recorded it exactly as if you would hear it. And when you played it back in stereo, and more headphones, you would hear exactly as if you were a person listening in that environment. And he did a funny thing with a haircut where you could hear the scissors going around your head. So I started working on something called Monster Sound Show, which at that time wasn't called that. I think that's what.
That was the ultimate name that they went
That was
with.
the ultimate name.
Yeah.
It was called Audio Adventure. Audio Adventure. And it was working with Rennie Rao and there were a couple, and Joe Harrington. Mm-hmm. And we came up with an idea for a radio show. And the idea was that people would go into a radio theater and they would sit down, and there would be the glass wall of the traditional radio theater. And so the actors were behind the glass wall, and the audience members would put on headphones, and they would be able to hear what the actors were recording. And it was a crime drama. And at some point, the lights went out in the theater. And when the lights went out, because there was a gunshot on stage, and all the lights went out. Now, supposedly the kind of activity, the crime activity, now descended into the theater, and you could hear people scurrying around. You could hear somebody talking behind your head. And it was all part of this radio show. I absolutely loved it. I thought it was one of the most inventive things to be thought of for EPCOT. And it was for Studio Tour. I was heartbroken, absolutely heartbroken, when it was decided that it wasn't a good fit. And that was when they went to Monster Sound Show. And that version of Audio Adventure with the binaural sound became a little booth in the post show. I really thought it was a great idea, and it would have been really fun. So I didn't let go of it. When we started up the research and development group, one of the projects that I asked to be funded was binaural sound. We came up, working with Tom Fitzgerald, we came up with an idea of creating an alien encounter where an alien would escape from a tube in the middle of a room that audiences were sitting around, and using binaural sound that was actually mounted in the seats so they wouldn't have to wear headphones, because that was a complaint about the radio show, was they didn't want people to be using headphones. They would get this binaural experience. That was the invention of that. We did, for R&D, we did a big mock-up of that theater. We did first the model. I worked on that, and then I worked on the actual mock-up of the binaural effect. And then it got turned over to the show team to do Alien Encounter for Florida, which I guess scared a lot of people, and that's why ultimately they didn't continue with the show, which I thought was unfortunate.
I talked to a few people that worked on Alien Encounter, and I went. I had gone and experienced it. Scary, but again, I was like old enough where I thought it was cool, but I don't know if I was 7 or 8 what I would have thought, but it was really fun.
Right. I was sorry to see that one go. I have a bad track record, I guess, with binaural sound.
Oh, that's funny. Well, tell me about the final scene of Horizons, jumping back since you mentioned it.
So one of the things that George McGinnis and General Electric really focused on was that idea that you get to choose your own tomorrow at the end of the ride. I don't know. I can't think of any ride anywhere at that time where you had an interactive experience on the ride itself, and especially where you get to choose the ending of the ride. It was really novel and unique, and a brilliant idea. And the development of it was really pushing the edge of technology. The idea that these TV screens, these video screens, would fully encapsulate the ride vehicle, and you would be able to see this tilt back on the ride vehicle and see these videos of these future experiences. That was something that had not been done before, and General Electric invested a ton of money in these video projectors, which they weren't off the shelf. They weren't being used anywhere. And it was a big risk too, because there was a lot of requirement to sync the projectors so that they would work correctly together. And it was a challenge, technological challenge, but there was real incentive to go ahead and make it work. And then the idea was that there were 4 guests in the vehicle, and there were 3 pads that lit up on the front of the vehicle. So you got to choose one of 3 tomorrows, the undersea, the desert, or outer space. And when you had kind of a consensus in the vehicle, actually, I think there were 4 pads because it would override if 2 and 2 chosen. So you would pick your tomorrow. Ideally, everybody would choose space or the desert or undersea. And then that would be the experience at the end of the ride for you. And you can go back and ride it again and choose a different tomorrow. That I thought was just absolutely brilliant for its time. George deserves a lot of recognition for that. It was great.
Oh, I love that. I always wanted space for some reason, but it was as a kid going again, like you said, nothing like that. I mean, there were things you go and press a button, but not on a ride like that. That was just mind blowing. Well, you mentioned that you were involved with founding the R&D department. I mean, I know that, that was in the late 80s. How did that come together, where that department got founded, which then led to things like binaural audio or like the ride vehicle in Indiana Jones, so many cool things. But how did you get involved starting that division?
So when I was working with General Electric on Horizons, I met a fellow named Dave Fink. Dave Fink was GE's technical representative to the ride. He had a lot of experience with the research and development group with GE, and he came in to kind of monitor, especially the development of those projectors at the end of the ride and several other technical achievements that GE really brought the technology to. After we finished Horizons and had come back, it was a few years later that Dave got courted by Disney to come in and help them with the engineering group. The engineering groups had gone through some different leadership. I think Jack Davis was there at that time. And there were some issues about development of technologies for the future. So Dave came in really to head up the engineering group at WDI, but he didn't care for it much. It wasn't forward advanced thinking enough for him. So he started thinking about creating a research and development group. Now, there was an R&D group in place. That was Dick Fox was leading that. And I think he had one employee, and that was Ben Schwegler. Ben did all the environmental issue development for Disney through Dick Fox. There might have been a few others. I think maybe Dave Harbaugh worked for them, for Dick. But Dave came in and said, I've got a different idea for what research and development should be. I really want to look at technologies and how they might apply to Disney's businesses, not only at Imagineering, but at the studio as well, and how they might apply in the future, 5 to 10 years in the future. So he started looking for leadership to do that. He brought on board a fellow named Dave Spencer. Dave Spencer had been with the audio video group and had done all of the AV requirements for Euro Disneyland. Brilliant guy. And he found Dave. And then he came to me one day. And at this point, I was working back in the model shop again, kind of doing some show design models and things like that. And he said to me, and he knew me from the Horizons project. So he knew my technical interests and how I was involved with a lot of that. So he said, you don't really want to be doing this. You really want to be doing research and development. And I said, Dave, I'm not an engineer. I don't have any experience in that regard. He said, I know. He said, I need someone that's going to help me creatively and start to think about what projects we should be doing from the creative side of the company. And I thought, at this point, I was actually thinking of leaving Disney because the creative opportunities that I was getting there weren't that great. I was kind of getting positioned. I had done a lot of work on Pleasure Island and in the concept development, but I didn't get to carry that into the field, which I was disappointed by. So I wasn't sure I really wanted to stay at Disney. And now this opportunity comes up to work with research and development. So I said, okay, I'll give it a shot if you'll give me a shot. So Dave Spencer, and I became the leadership of the new R&D group. And I started reading and getting very involved in management of research and development. I started looking at Lockheed. I started looking at a lot of other companies that had been in the R&D business and what they did right, did wrong, and I kind of enjoyed it. It was something I found really interesting. So working with them, I became not only a creative liaison for the rest of the company, but also looking at how it might be structured, how the division might be structured within the company and how it might support different divisions. What a great opportunity. It took me out of all of my model building experience, all of my show set experience, but it didn't leave any of that behind. It kind of took it with me, but brought me into this management of people that were a hell of a lot smarter than I was. For me to tell Ben Schwegler what to do was just insane. And a lot of those other folks, Mike Peterson, but we started hiring people at that point and started thinking about, and I really was involved in looking at what those different projects might be and how they might be funded and who we needed to hire to do those different projects. Just what a great team. We kind of set, I'm sorry, I'm stumbling here a little bit, but we were given some money. As I recall, I think it was $50,000. And we were given a space in Tahunga, North Hollywood, which is where they were fabricating. I remember they were doing a lot of costuming at that point over there. We were given a space. We weren't given desks. We weren't given anything else, and said, go figure something out. But the first project we did was the Indiana Jones ride vehicle. One of the first, and it was also the binaural sound for Alien Encounter was another first. But that project was driven by John Snoddy, who was not in the R&D group. And John had come to Dave and I and Dave Spencer and had showed us a model of a Jeep type vehicle on a carriage that was a 6 degree of motion simulator. And he thought that it would accentuate the ride movement to be able to tilt this vehicle in different ways as it was on a ride track. We had done some development of the idea of a barcode system to be able to run a ride vehicle on, so it wouldn't actually have to be on a track. And we said, okay, we're going to buy the 6 degree of freedom motion base. We're going to get some wheels, and we're going to build a box to sit on top of that. And my assignment at the time was to kind of theme it, make it look good. And we bought those parts, and we basically spent the $50,000 buying those parts. And at this point, we were actually reporting to Mickey Steinberg and Frank Wells. And Frank Wells was really our mentor in all of this. He was the guy that was really going to get us the funding that we were going to need. So we brought him over to Tahunga to show him this great thing that we were doing and several other projects. And Frank came over and he approved the binaural sound. He approved several other things. And he looked at the ride vehicle and he said, no. He said, it's going to cost too much. He said, I've seen what happens with engineering on ride systems and stuff. He said, just forget about it. We're not going to fund it. So we were really set back. We really believed in it and thought it was a great thing. And so we started borrowing money behind Frank's back, and we went to different divisions of the company, and we worked with Mickey to try and get some money here and there, and we finished assembling it. It was the very first Indiana Jones ride vehicle. And at that time, we didn't know it was going to be an Indiana Jones ride vehicle. We just assembled it as a Jeep on this motion base. And we got it together and finished assembling it, and we invited Frank and Michael Eisner and George Lucas, because at this point, it had taken off with show design, and Tony Baxter had seen it, and John Snoddy was still involved, and the idea of Indiana Jones came up, and that was what we started thinking that how it would work. So we set up a review for them to come over and write it. This is a bittersweet moment for me because I had so much invested in this. I had been involved in the actual fabrication of it. It had my hands in it. It was a great moment. We were gonna show it, and this was going to be terrific. And at the same time, my wife and I were having a baby. So the day that it came to show the ride vehicle, that George Lucas and Frank Wells and Michael Eisner arrived, I was in the hospital delivering daughter with my wife, who was primarily responsible for that event. And I'll tell you a funny story. There was a great moment. My wife had a very long labor. It was exhausting. And I got a call from Dave, and he said, "How's it going?" And I said, "We just had a baby girl. This is incredible." He said, "Good. Can you get in here? They're going to be here in about a half an hour." And I said, "Dave, I can't do that." So I missed it. I was not there for the presentation, which was absolutely fantastic. And Frank fully approved the project at that point. Unfortunately, I wasn't there.
Well, I mean, there's a good reason, you know.
Yeah, there's a good reason.
If there's any reason in the world that's a good reason, I have to say. I love that Indiana Jones ride, and I'm glad you got to be a part of it there. And I want to ask you too, because I know you joined Sony Development, I believe in '94, and worked there for quite a while on a lot of interesting attractions. You know, I've seen the list where it's like museums. I mean, not even just Sony, but you did a lot. You've done things for MGM. You did a lot of interesting things in between when you worked at Disney to some of the recent projects. So I'd love to know a little bit about kind of some of the other work you did and just what were some of the things that stood out that you worked on kind of in that mid-90s to early 2000s.
So the transition to Sony wasn't an easy one. It was there was an exodus from WDI at that time because of changes in senior management. Frank Wells had died in that helicopter crash. We had felt very, very close to Frank and him making a lot of the decisions about research and development within the company. So Dave and I and Dave Spencer all made the decision collectively to leave WDI and go to Sony because Sony was offering really another research and development opportunity. So Sony, Mickey Shuloff at the time, who was the head of Sony, had been looking for someone to develop location-based entertainment for Sony. And we were on the target list of potential people to do that. We interviewed and it went really well, and Mickey brought us on, and we were ready to make the transition out of Disney. Going into Sony, though, it was not to build something. It was really to create an R&D group to look at opportunities to build location-based entertainment. And we set up a small shop in Burbank, and we started developing things. And then also Bob Weiss at the time had left Disney, and he started a group called Design Island. And he also was getting contracted by Sony to look at this idea. Whereas we were focused on R&D and really becoming more of a technology group, Bob was focused on the creative side. And Bob was really looking at how to create this place, and started working with Maurice Sendak. He had an idea with David McCauley, several other people to kind of use those as IP. We started meeting with Bob and collectively working together. What happened was that Bob went along with this for a while and then decided that he didn't want it to be his focus. He actually wound up working with DreamWorks for a while. And so I inherited the designs that Bob had started and Design Island had started. And also a lot of the people that worked at Design Island came to work for me at Sony. So I have been hired as a vice president within Sony to look at developing this location-based entertainment. And at this point, Lowe's, which was their theater company, had contracted to build a big theater in San Francisco. And we started looking at that building and that site as a location for this big idea. And we developed models. Now, about that time, I did something that was a little bit miraculous. I developed a relationship with the Japanese side of the company. There was a woman, Kayako Mogi, who was working at the design center, and I actually brought her over to work with me. I remember Mickey Steinberg wasn't particularly happy about that. He thought that I shouldn't be working that closely with the Japanese side of the company, although it wound up really working in our favor because we started to understand what their requirements were a lot better, especially with the language difficulties. So that was something to have a Japanese person right on site with us, working with us. So we developed this idea called Metreon. And the idea was to create a location-based entertainment company that would focus on Sony and offer really new forms of entertainment. We did a focus group in San Francisco at one point where we presented this. It didn't go all that well, to be honest. They looked at it and they said, well, this is San Francisco. We don't really think this is going to work here. I think a lot of management above me thought, well, if you build it, they will come. Let's just focus on what we need to do and make it work. We built it, and it was extraordinary place. I remember there was a great review I read at the time that said it was mind-blowing in the sense that you had Microsoft there, you had Discovery Channel there, you had Maurice Sendak and Where the Wild Things Are, you had David Macaulay and his whole idea of the way things work, and we had Mobius, Jean Giraud, who is an incredible comic book artist, that we developed this whole interactive attraction called Airtight Garage, which was all about playing games, video games. Conceptually, it was brilliant. The problem was, if you build it, they will come, didn't really work. It was in an area by the Moscone Convention Center. So they would come when there were conventions. People would flock into it, but when there weren't, or there were, and the idea of getting kids and small children to that part of town, there was insufficient parking. There were a lot of problems that we should have recognized early on that we didn't. And so it didn't last all that long. And also, I don't think Sony's appetite for it at that time was there. They kind of got into it and then realized they had to manage it, and they didn't want to manage it. So they hired people to come in and manage it from the outside, and it started to deteriorate. I think the first one that left was Discovery Channel, and then that was followed by Microsoft leaving. And from those two leaving, they were two big anchors, and it was, I think it's a Target now, so it really worked. But if you were there when it opened, it was really a pretty spectacular place, and unlike anything else. And I'm very proud of it creatively.
Yeah.
I think there were things that Sendak, Where the Wild Things Are, was a phenomenal interactive space. The Mobius area with hyper bowling, if you ever got to try that was unbelievable. So there were some things there that were pretty amazing.
Yeah, it sounds amazing. I admit I don't know much about it, but it sounds really cool. I want to make sure you mentioned about kind of gaming and everything else. That kind of leads well into much later, but Test Track, second version, which I know you were involved with as a show producer and creative director for reimagining that attraction, which I think turned out great. And I'd love to hear a little bit about how that came together for you and your experience.
So I got a call from Joe Garlington, who I'd worked with way back in the Tron arcade days.
Mhm.
And Joe called me and said that he had some interactive requirements. And I had been doing, after we finished Sony, I had been doing some museum work. I did a lot of work interactively with a little children's museum here in LA called the Zimmer Children's Museum. And I had done some other interactive museum work. So Joe said he had seen some of that. He thought, well, maybe there's a fit for some of this. Would you come in and help us with some of the interactive development? I came in, started to review the attraction with Brent Strong, who was the kind of show producer at that time, and started to get more involved on the creative side of it and what it might be. Brent was busy with a lot of other things going on at that time, and he asked me if I would take a bigger responsibility for the overall attraction development. I said, sure. I actually got hired at that point as a show producer and came into it having been gone from Disney for 12 years. To be honest, I didn't get a whole lot of support within the company. They kind of said, oh, go do this thing. And I didn't really know organizationally how the company worked anymore, but I said, okay, I'll do my best. What happened was that I developed a really strong relationship with General Motors. There was a fellow there named Jeff Malenik, who was my counterpart. He was at GM. He was responsible for all of GM's event programming and event design for trade shows and things like that. Jeff was just a fabulous designer. He had a great team, and I became very dependent on his input and let them really take a strong role in the design development, which a lot of people at WDI told me, don't do that. We've done this with other companies before. It doesn't work. You're going to fail. This is not going to work. I didn't believe it. I believe that they were really super talented people. I put together a very small team from WDI. There was Mike Overman, Alex Grayman, Debbie Gonzalez, and Daniel Joseph on the effects side. That was a minimal team creatively. So we went to GM and we said, okay, we're going to work with you guys and we're going to actually let you do some design work. And they were great at it. They were absolutely spectacular. And so if you go to the attraction, that pre-show, we staged it and we figured out all of the interior design and all of that. But like those models that are in there and the actual sets, they built those. They were so involved and dedicated to doing that and willing to put the resources in it, and it absolutely spectacularly beautiful. I don't know that using WDI resources, I could have ever done that. Certainly not for the money. And we did a great job creatively with that entire attraction. I'm very, very proud of what we did there. A spectacular show.
Well, so much of that, too, was making it interactive and having you design the car. And then the whole style is different. It's very futuristic with the music score and everything. But I'm curious, the interactive part, how challenging was that to do that, where someone's going designing a car and then it connects kind of to the post-show and it connects a bit to the ride and how that comes together?
It was completely insane because when you looked at the creative budget, okay, and I can't remember the numbers offhand, but I would say when you looked at all of the budget for the ride, for the interior design, for all the stuff that I just described, and then you took that number and at least 75% of it was going to go into making it interactive. So it was a big number and a huge risk. Disney at that point was working on the Magic Bands concept. So we knew that they had technology for the Magic Bands. And Joe Garlington was instrumental in doing a lot of this. He really kind of formulated that direction and really worked with those guys and taking that technology and making it work. Working with General Motors, we decided that we really wanted to design a car and let guests have that experience of designing a car. So we started really focusing on that. It was overwhelming in its scope. The whole idea, I think we figured out at one point the number of cars that you could actually design in that attraction was well beyond the billions. It was unbelievable how many different cars you could design, what variations there would be, and the idea that you would connect with that design and then take it with you into the ride and have that, using that wristband technology, have that what you had designed, take it with you, and then have that report back to you how well your car performed in the test track ride experience. Just unbelievable that we were able to accomplish that. And then you took it into the post show, and you had post show experiences where you used that same information, your car, to drive on a little track where you would kind of race other drivers, and you were racing your car that you designed. You got to design or create a television commercial using your car that you designed. It was just staggering that we accomplished that. And we did it in 18 months. The fact that we were able to take that from concept and bring it all the way through to completion of construction in 18 months. There were some complaints at the end of the project about what it cost, but I got to tell you that the costs were not in the creative side or in the technology side. The costs were actually in the construction side. It kind of fell apart on that side, but I'm immensely, enormously proud of it. It was just great.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I think it turned out really well. And especially given that, like you said, 18 months, most new attractions take 3, 4, 5 years, if not more. So the fact that you did that is incredible. So I really like it. Well, I want to finish and ask you briefly about your work on the Tron Realm post show, which a lot of people compare the current test track to Tron. I have not been to Shanghai. Actually, haven't even ridden the new Tron in Magic Kingdom yet. But I'm curious to finish up kind of with your experience working on that post show, which I know is a big part of that attraction in Shanghai.
So I think when I finished Test Track, what I realized about myself creatively was that I was very good at being able to look at what a guest experience should be in an interactive environment for them to get reward out of that. I am not a gamer. I don't particularly like video games. I never played them. But I do like the idea of in a interactive experience in a theme park of being able to give people reward from an experience like that within the time frame that you have. That you don't have hours and hours and hours to sit there and play a game. You've got a couple of minutes. Maybe 2 or 3 minutes to get that experience and make it fulfilling and rewarding for people. I love that. That was kind of where I finished up with Test Track and where I felt I really kind of fit. I had gotten a call from the Shanghai team asking me to meet with them about this development they had in mind for a Tron attraction in Shanghai. They knew my experience with General Motors, and it was likely that General Motors was going to be the sponsor for the Tron attraction in Shanghai. So I kind of got ferried into it that way. Scott Drake was really responsible for the Tron attraction and even the theming of the overall Tron Realm at the end. But they asked me to really look at the interactive and develop the interactive for Tron Realm. Which I felt very comfortable doing. When we laid that attraction out, it had to take a lot of people off of the ride, get them through Tron Realm, get them through all that interactive, and let them experience that, feel rewarded, and get out of the building as quickly as possible because there's a lot of people flowing through there. So we started looking, first of all, at the test track experience for designing a car. And we decided that we could create an experience like that where you design a Tron car. So we did use a lot of the tech from that. Early on, we talked about it being interactive in the same way where they would connect via a wristband or something like that. To be honest with you, I ruled that out from the get-go because I knew the cost involved with doing that, and I didn't want to spend the money there. We really focused on the different independent attractions. I think one of my most favorite ones is that kind of hockey game that you play in the interactive area. That originally was supposed to be a driving simulator, and we couldn't make it work. It just wasn't fun. And we had spent some development dollars on that, and then finally went back and said, wait a minute, the air hockey is something everybody loves to play. Can we kind of make it work with everything else in here? So we completely changed directions on that. Very smart move, because we were able to develop that and build it. The attraction where guests see themselves as a Tron figure and then actually get to drive a Tron car. And there's a moment there where it captures your image when you're standing in front of there, and you actually see yourself in the Tron car, the physical car, as you exit the ride or exit that interactive experience. That was something nobody else had done. We really broke ground on that and made that happen. The driving simulator itself we knew we didn't have money to put a lot of vehicles in there and do a traditional kind of multi-driving. So we created these 3 cars that you would get in, and a big giant screen. No one had done that before. So they were both very, very unique interactive elements in that attraction. And I think guests love them as far as I know and what I've read about it since it opened. Unfortunately, I never got back to see it finish.
Well, I think that just you mentioning all those kind of innovative sides, that fits with kind of your whole career and what you've worked on. So, Trevor, this has been really awesome. I've really enjoyed talking with you, and thanks so much.
Yeah, I loved it too. It's really been fun.
Well, that was a real treat to get a chance to talk to someone who worked directly on Horizons. That's the first time that's happened for me, and Horizons, of course, is one of my favorites, if not my all-time favorite Disney attraction, and Trevor was really cool. Also really enjoyed talking about Test Track. If you'd like to learn more about Trevor and what he's done, he was at Retro Magic last year in October, which was all focused on Epcot. There's a video that's nearly an hour that they put out, and I will also post the link in the show notes on the tomorrowsociety.com blog, so you can easily go watch it. He did a lot of small interviews when the Test Track 2.0 came out, but this one really dives into Horizons, talks to him, and then those guys do a good job of a lot of pictures and a lot of information. So I had heard of Trevor, but after seeing that video, I was like, oh, I think it'd be perfect to talk with him on the show. And he was very cool. And so Retro WW, those guys do a great job. Check out their channel for this interview and others like Bob Holland from last week or Davey Fighton. And they've also been on this show in the past. If you'd like to check out the 226 past episodes of Tomorrow Society podcast, you can find them all wherever you listen to podcasts, or you can go to tomorrowsociety.com/podcasts with an S at the end. Easily access them. I have them separated by Imagineers, trip reports, other podcasters, authors, all the different types of people that I've talked with on this show. If you'd like to help support this podcast, there are no ads in this podcast, no current sponsors. The main way that I keep doing this is through support of listeners like you. And the easy way to do so is through Patreon and get access to some really cool perks, including bonus podcasts. Go to patreon.com/Tomorrow Society to learn more, or you can make a one-time contribution and buy me a Dole Whip. As I'm recording this, I have come back from Walt Disney World, and I did have a strawberry Dole Whip float with Barks Root Beer that was quite good. Hadn't had that before. That was from Sunshine Tree Terrace. And speaking of that, my next episode will be part 1 of my trip report from our Walt Disney World trip. Spoiler alert, it wasn't that crowded. Before I do that, if you'd like to get a hold of me, send me an email, dan@tomorrowsociety.com. Follow me on all the social media by searching for Tomorrow Society. It's really easy to find me on YouTube, Threads, Blue Sky, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all the various spots. And it's always awesome to hear from you. The music you're hearing right now was written by Adam Hookey and performed by the Sophisticated Babies. And like I just mentioned, next week I will be talking about our quick spring break trip to Walt Disney World. Part 1 of 2. Very excited to dive into everything, including Disney Genie Plus, our resort, how we got around, what the crowds are like, and what I thought of Guardians and Tron. Both were first-time rides for me. Thanks, as always, for listening to this show, and I will talk to you again next time.